The alien's hand was already around Lieutenant Kyle Brennan's throat when the ship's hull cracked open like an egg. Not metaphorically. The hull actually cracked, a sound like God snapping a spine, and then the cold of deep space came rushing in through the fracture, screaming through every corridor of the survey vessel Cardinal Point. And Kyle had about 4 seconds to decide whether the creature choking him was more dangerous than the vacuum trying to eat them both. He chose the vacuum. Always bet on the thing you understand. He grabbed the alien's wrist, not to pry it off, but to pull her toward the emergency seal panel on the wall. She weighed twice what he expected. Dense, like grabbing a person made of wet concrete. But she moved. Because the cold moved her when his grip didn't. And Kyle slammed his free hand on the panel, and the emergency membrane deployed, and the crack in the hull sealed with a sound like a thunderclap going backward. Silence. The alien released his throat. Kyle coughed once, pressed his back against the wall, and looked at her properly for the first time. She was tall. Taller than anyone had any business being. Pale gray skin that had a faint blue tint under the emergency lights, and 4 fingers on each hand, and eyes that were too large and completely black. No iris, no white, just dark, like 2 holes cut in her face. Her uniform, if it was a uniform, had been shredded somewhere in whatever fight she'd been in before she ended up on his ship. Her breathing was labored, not in a delicate way, in a something is wrong way. Her name, Kyle would learn later, was Venira. But in that first moment, she was just a problem standing in front of him, clutching her ribs, looking at him with those black eyes, like she was deciding whether he was the thing that had hurt her or just something in the way. "You sealed the hull," she said. Her translator chip, a small silver disc pressed behind her ear, converted her words with a half-second delay, the edges of the syllables slightly wrong, like hearing music played in the right key but on the wrong instrument. "Yeah," Kyle said. "Why?" It wasn't a question. It was a test. "Because we were both going to die otherwise," he said. "I'm assuming you didn't come here to die." She stared at him. Her breathing was getting worse. Kyle could see it now. The way her left side wasn't moving right when she inhaled. The way she kept her arm pressed tight against her ribs. When she was hurt badly. The kind of hurt that looked manageable until it wasn't. "Sit down," he said. "I don't take orders from—" "You're bleeding internally," he said. "I can tell because you're breathing with your right lung and pretending the left one isn't on fire. Sit down or fall down, your choice." Another stare. Longer this time. She sat. Kyle went to the emergency kit mounted 2 meters down the corridor, cracked it open, and started pulling supplies. The Cardinal Point had been a survey vessel before the war turned every ship into something else. It still had medical supplies rated for human physiology and 1 universal scanner that had cost more than Kyle's salary for 3 years. He ran the scanner over her without asking permission. She let him, which told him the pain was bad enough that pride had taken a back seat. And the scanner beeped in the unhappy way scanners beep when they find something they don't like. 3 cracked ribs," he said. "And your secondary circulatory pump, the one on your left side, it's under pressure from fluid buildup. You've got maybe 2 hours before that becomes a problem I can't fix." "You cannot fix it now," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I can drain the fluid, and that buys us time to get you to a proper medical bay." She was quiet. Outside the sealed section of hull, Kyle could still hear the Cardinal Point groaning. The ship had taken hits during the ambush, the same ambush that had apparently deposited a wounded Venari commander in his corridor. The engines were running at 60%. Navigation was still calculating how far off course they'd drifted. And somewhere in the ship's system, An alert was still pinging about atmospheric integrity in Cargo Bay 2. "You are the only crew member remaining," Venira said. It was not a guess. Kyle didn't answer right away. He was prepping the drainage needle, a long, thin tool designed for humans, but close enough in function for what she needed. "Yes," he said. "Then you are trying to save someone who came here to take this ship." "Yeah," he said again. She looked at the needle, then at him. "You humans," she said, and stopped. Whatever she had planned to say next, she didn't. "Hold still," he said. "This is going to feel like someone parking a truck on your ribs. Try not to move." She held still. He pressed the needle in. Her voice broke. A sharp sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a word. Somewhere between shock and something older than language. Her hand came up and gripped Kyle's forearm, not to stop him, just to hold on to something solid while the fluid drained and the pressure in her chest released in a long, slow exhale that seemed to go on longer than physics should have allowed. "Human," she said, her voice rough. "What are you doing to my body?" "Saving it," he said. She didn't let go of his arm. The cardinal point kept groaning. The alert in Cargo Bay 2 kept pinging. The emergency light above them flickered once, twice, stayed on. Kyle finished the procedure, sealed the entry point, and sat back on his heels. Venira released his arm and looked at her own hand like she didn't entirely recognize it. "Why?" she said again. Same word, different weight. "Because the war was someone else's idea," Kyle said. "And you were going to die in my hallway, and I'm not built for watching that." She looked at him for a long time with those black eyes that gave nothing away. Then the ship shuddered. A new impact. Not a weapon, a docking clamp. Someone had found them. Kyle stood up, checked the corridor, checked the scanner. 3 signatures outside. Venari biosigns. Venira stood too, slower, holding her side, but standing. "Your people," he said. "My superiors," she corrected. The difference in those 2 words was a universe wide. Kyle understood then that she hadn't come to the cardinal point to take it. She'd come to it to hide. He picked up the only weapon he had left, a short-range pulse emitter with half a charge. "How many ways into this ship?" she asked. 4, he said. "I can cover 2. "I can cover 1, she said. "That leaves 1 uncovered." "Yes," she said. "No, it does." They looked at each other. "Kyle Brennan," he said. "Survey Corps, technically a civilian." "Venira," she said. "Third Commander, currently a fugitive." The docking clamp tightened. The airlock began to cycle. "Nice to meet you," Kyle said. He moved. She moved. The airlock opened. Venira had not expected to survive the ambush. She had not planned to. When the Council ships dropped out of corridor space directly behind her scout vessel and opened fire without transmitting a single word of warning, she had understood with the cold clarity that comes just before the end that this was an execution wearing the mask of an accident. She had ejected in an emergency pod, not out of survival instinct, but because the intelligence she carried in her memory buffer could not die with her. It had to reach someone, or anyone who wasn't already working for the Council. The human survey vessel had been the only thing in range. She had boarded it the fastest way available to her, which was not politely. And then the hull had cracked, and the human had sealed it. And here she was, alive. Patched together by hands that should have let her die on principle, standing in a dark corridor with her ribs screaming and a pulse emitter pointed at a cycling airlock. "They will not negotiate," she said. "I know," Kyle said. He was to her left, pressed flat against the wall. The way he moved reminded her of someone who had learned to survive in tight spaces. Not a soldier. Something else. Someone who solved problems before they became fights and fought only when there was no other geometry left. They will take the ship. They can try, he said. The airlock finished its cycle. The inner door cracked open. Venira counted. 3. She had guessed 3 from the sounds of the clamp. The first one through the door was holding a compression lance, high yield, the kind rated for punching through bulkheads. Not a weapon you brought to arrest someone. A weapon you brought to ensure there was no body left that could be argued over later. Kyle fired first. The half-charged pulse emitter caught the first soldier in the shoulder, not lethal, but enough to spin him into the second one coming through behind him. And Venira was already moving, 3 cracked ribs and all, because this was what her body had been built for across generations of a species that settled disputes by putting everything on the table and daring the universe to take it. She took the compression lance from the first soldier before he understood it was gone. Used it as a brace to drive the second one back into the airlock frame. The third one hesitated. Hesitation is a gift. Kyle was already there. The third soldier went down. The airlock sealed again. Kyle locked it from the inside with a manual bar wedged through the mechanism. A human solution. Crude and immediate and completely effective. Silence again. Venira leaned against the wall. Her ribs had opinions, loud ones. "There will be more," she said. "How long before they reposition?" 12 minutes. 8 if their pilot is good. Kyle was already moving toward the bridge. She followed, because standing still was not an option, and neither was letting the only competent person on this ship walk away from her line of sight. And the bridge was small, human-scaled, everything slightly too low, too soft, too concerned with comfort in a way Venari design never was. Screens showed the cardinal point status in amber and red. Navigation had finished its calculation. They were in neutral space, barely, the kind of barely that lawyers argue about for decades. Kyle pulled up communications. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Broadcasting," he said. "To whom?" "Everyone." She stared at him. "You cannot broadcast our position. The council will already know where we are," he said. "But if everyone else knows too, they have to behave." He looked at her. "Unless they don't care about witnesses anymore." The look she gave him then was not gratitude. It was the look a person gives when someone else has just named the thing they were most afraid of. "They don't," she said quietly. "That is the intelligence I am carrying. The council has decided that witnesses are no longer a constraint." Kyle's hand paused over the broadcast panel. "How long have you known?" 3 days, she said. "Since I found the order in files I was never supposed to access." "And the order says?" She met his eyes. Her translator chip carried the words across the gap between their languages, with its usual half-second delay, the syllables slightly wrong, the weight of them completely right. "It says humanity is to be removed from contested space," she said. "All of it, by any means, with no record kept." The cardinal point hummed around them. The amber lights pulsed. Somewhere in cargo bay, too, the atmosphere alert was still pinging, patient and ignored, the smallest problem in the room. Kyle Brennan, on survey corps, technically a civilian, pressed the broadcast button. His voice went out to every frequency in neutral space, to every ship with a receiver, human and Venari, and every other species caught in the middle of someone else's decision. "This is the survey vessel Cardinal Point," he said. "I have a Venari commander aboard with evidence of a council directive to commit systematic removal of human presence from contested space. We are in neutral territory. We are being pursued by council ships. Anyone receiving this, please respond." He released the button. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then the board lit up like something had knocked over a jar of stars. Venira looked at the incoming signals. Ships, dozens. Not all human, not all Venari. Species she recognized, and some she didn't. In all of them, suddenly very interested in what was happening in this small corner of neutral space. "You gambled," she said. "I estimated," he corrected. "What is the difference?" He almost smiled. The expression was quick and crooked and gone before it finished arriving. "Math," he said. Outside, through the cracked forward viewport, the council ships were repositioning. 8 minutes, she had said, if their pilot was good. The pilot was good. But there were now 37 ships on the board that hadn't been there before, and the council had not planned for 37 ships. "They will call this interference," Venira said. "Let them," Kyle said. "Let them call it out loud where everyone can hear." She understood then what he had done. Not just the broadcast, the sequence of it. Seal the hull first so they had a ship. To drain the fluid so she could stand. Take the airlock so they had time. Then broadcast. Not as a distress call, but as a spotlight, aimed directly at the thing the council needed to keep in the dark. Each step had been its own problem, solved in order, no heroics, no speeches. Just a man who didn't stop moving. Her ribs hurt, her secondary circulatory pump was still running hot. She was a fugitive standing on an enemy vessel with cracked translation software and evidence that could end a war or start a worse one. She had never, in 30 years of service, trusted anyone faster. That terrified her more than the council ships did. "Kyle Brennan," she said. He was already pulling up the navigation interface, calculating options, not looking at her. "Yeah. If we survive this," she said. "When?" he said. She paused. "Watch when we survive this," she said. "I would like to understand how you decided to save me." He typed a course correction. The cardinal point shuddered and began to turn, slow and wounded and completely in motion. "You were in my hallway," he said. That was enough. She had no answer for that. Not in Venari, not in any language her translator chip knew. She stood beside him at the navigation console and watched the board fill with signals, and watched the council ships slow their approach, and watched the universe, just for this moment, decide to pay attention. The cardinal point flew. It was not fast. It was not clean. One engine at 60%, a cracked hull sealed with emergency membrane, a crew of 2 who had been trying to kill each other 20 minutes ago. But it flew. And every ship on that board was watching. Solki, the transmission from the Venari Council, came in 40 minutes later, compressed and encrypted and routed through 3 relay stations in a way that was meant to look like it wasn't coming from the Council at all. Kyle decoded it in 11 minutes. Venira timed him. "You are fast," she said. "Survey Corps spends a lot of time in places where the signals are weird," he said. "You learn to read the noise." The message, once decoded, was a single paragraph. Formal language, council dialect, which Venira translated because even the best human linguistics software stumbled on the syntactic structure of official Venari bureaucracy. It said that the commander-designated Venira was to be considered a rogue operative. It said the intelligence she carried was fabricated. It said the survey vessel Cardinal Point had been seized illegally, and Kyle Brennan was to be considered a hostile combatant. It said all of this in language so careful and clean that it almost sounded reasonable. "They're fast too," Kyle said. "They have been preparing this response since I ejected," Venira said. "Possibly before." "How do we prove the intelligence is real?" She looked at him. Then she pressed 2 fingers to the silver disc behind her ear. the memory buffer built into the translator housing, not just translation software. The reason she had not let herself die in that pod. "It is not stored in the ship's systems," she said. "It is here, in this device. They cannot remotely wipe it. They cannot claim the files were altered, because the buffer records every access with a biometric timestamp. The data has not been touched since I copied it from the Council archive." "And who verifies biometric timestamps for Venari memory buffers?" "The Neutral Observer Course," she said. "They have a station 11 hours from here." Kyle looked at the board. The Council ships had not followed. They were sitting at the edge of neutral space, just inside the boundary, which told him two things. One, they weren't willing to act in front of 37 witnesses. Two, they were waiting for the witnesses to leave. 11 hours, he said. "With this engine, more like 14. "Yes. And in 14 hours, some of those 37 ships will have moved on." "Yes. So we need to keep them interested." Van Ira looked at the broadcast panel, then at Kyle. "You want to keep transmitting?" "Not just us," he said. "Can you access the Council's own communications frequencies?" She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant she was calculating whether to answer. "You want to broadcast the evidence," she said. "Now, before we reach the observer station. I want to make it impossible for the Council to pretend it doesn't exist," he said. "If it's only on that buffer, they can find a way to get at it. But if it's already out there, already in the open, already in the logs of 37 ships and 100 relay stations, they cannot unbroadcast it," she said. "No," he said, "they can't." She reached up and touched the disc behind her ear. A small gesture. "Careful." "If I transmit," she said, "every Venari in neutral space will hear it. Not just the ships on this board. Everyone." "I know," he said. "Then it will not just end the directive," she said. "It will end the Council's credibility. There will be a political collapse, possibly a restructuring. Possibly worse." "I know," he said again. "You are asking me to detonate something very large on behalf of a species that is not yours to protect." Kyle leaned against the navigation console. The amber lights were still on. The atmosphere alert in Cargo Bay 2 was still pinging. He hadn't fixed that yet. He was keeping a mental list. "I'm asking you to decide," he said. "It's your people, your government, your call. I'll fly this ship wherever you tell me to fly it." She stared at him. "You will not argue," she said. "You will not push." "It's not my push to make." The board showed the Council ships, patient at the boundary. It showed the 37 other ships, drifting, watching, waiting for something that would tell them whether this was worth their time. Van Ira thought about the files she had found 3 days ago. She thought about the order written in the clean, formal language of people who had decided that the scale of what they were planning was large enough that it stopped being a crime and became a policy. She thought about the word removal and the blank, bureaucratic space where the word humanity had been placed like an item on a list. She pressed her fingers to the disc behind her ear. "Kyle Brennan," she said. "Yeah." "Do not let go of the controls," she said. "When this transmits, the Council ships may decide the witnesses are no longer enough of a deterrent." "Already watching them," he said. She closed her eyes. The broadcast went out, not on one frequency, on all of them. Every channel the Cardinal Point's damaged communication array could reach, boosted through the relay network of every ship on that board, spreading outward at the speed of signal into the dark. The evidence, all of it, the order, the planning documents, the timelines, The names of the council members who had approved it. Everything. Kyle watched the board. For 4 seconds, nothing moved. Then the council ships moved. Not toward them. Away. Folding back into corridor space with a speed that looked, even on sensors, like panic. They ran, Kyle said. They are going to try to get ahead of it, Vanira said. Her voice was flat. The translator chip delivered it precisely. They will issue statements. They will assign blame to lower officials, and they will call it a misunderstanding. Will it work? She opened her eyes and looked at the board. At the 37 ships, at the signals that were already multiplying as the broadcast propagated outward. No, she said. Not this time. Her hand had come off the disc behind her ear. She looked at it again, that same way she had looked at it in the corridor, like she was cataloging its parts. Kyle Brennan, she said. You can just call me Kyle, he said. Kyle, she said. The translator chip managed his name cleanly. It had probably recalibrated to his voice in the last hour. I need to sit down. Yeah, he said. Probably. He stepped back from the console and pointed at the co-pilot seat. Ribs still bad? Ribs are always bad when they're cracked, she said. This is not new information. Right. He reached into the medical kit he'd brought to the bridge. I've got something that'll take the edge off. Human formulated, but the scanner said your pain receptor biology's close enough. She looked at the kit, then at him. You checked my pain receptor biology, she said. When I was running the diagnostic earlier, he said. Habit. She sat down in the co-pilot seat. It was too small and too soft and oriented for a body shaped differently than hers. She sat in it anyway. You prepared for this? She said. Before you knew any of this would happen. I just checked the scanner, he said. I like to know what I'm working with. He handed her the pain capsule. She took it without debating the point. The cardinal point flew on toward the observer station. 14 hours, more or less. Through neutral space that was no longer as quiet as it had been this morning. Outside, the signals kept multiplying. The broadcast was out there now, moving at the speed of everything that cannot be stopped once it has started. Vanira sat in the too small seat and breathed carefully around her cracked ribs and thought about a human who sealed hulls and drained fluid and decoded transmissions and checked pain receptor biology as a matter of habit, and did not once ask her to be grateful. The cardinal point had a cargo bay with an atmosphere leak and engines at 60%, and a crew of 2 who were not technically supposed to be on the same side. It felt, for reasons she did not yet have the language for, like the most structurally sound vessel she had ever been on. She did not say this. She was saving it. For later. The observer station designated Neutral Post 7 hung in the dark, like an afterthought. Small and battered, and hung with signal lights that blinked in the irregular pattern of hardware that had been repaired too many times by too many different hands. It had been there for 60 years. It had seen 11 territorial disputes, 4 ceasefire negotiations, 2 species make first contact for the second time, and 1 incident involving a malfunctioning probe and 3 weeks of diplomatic paperwork. It had never had a morning like this one. Kyle brought the cardinal point in on manual because the docking computer was one of the 6 systems still showing red on the status board. The ship drifted into the berth at the kind of speed that made the station's docking team visibly nervous on the external camera feed, and then kissed the docking collar with a sound like a heavy door closing softly. Nice landing, Vanira said. Don't, he said. She didn't. The station's observation officers came aboard within 4 minutes of docking confirmation. There were 3 of them. species Kyle didn't know. Tall and green-gray with 4 eyes arranged in a horizontal band across their faces. And they wore the white and gold of the Neutral Observer Corps with a kind of careful precision that said they understood exactly what kind of day they were having. The lead observer introduced herself as Coordinator Vela Sin. She looked at Venira's shredded uniform and cracked ribs, and at Kyle's bruised throat, and at the hull membrane patched over the stress fracture in the corridor wall. And she asked no unnecessary questions. "Commander Venira," she said, "we received your broadcast." "Then you know what I am carrying," Venira said. "We know what you transmitted," Vela Sin said carefully. "Verification of the original data is the purpose of this meeting." "Yes," Venira said. "It is?" She reached up and removed the silver disc from behind her ear. It left a small red mark on the skin. She held it out to Vela Sin without drama, without ceremony, the way you hand someone a tool you have been carrying for 3 days, through an ambush and a hull breach, and a firefight in a corridor, and 14 hours of damaged flight. Vela Sin took it with both hands. "We will need several hours to complete verification," she said. "I know," Venira said. Vela Sin looked at Kyle. "And you, Mr. Brennan, Survey Corps." "Technically a civilian," he said. "Yes," Vela Sin said, with the expression of someone who would be dealing with that technicality in written reports for some time. "We will need a statement from you as well." "Sure," he said. "But I need to fix a cargo bay atmosphere leak first. It's been pinging at me for 14 hours, and it is starting to feel personal." Vela Sin blinked 2 of her 4 eyes. It seemed to be the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "I will send a technician," she said. "I can do it myself," he said. "It's a standard seal. 15 minutes. She looked at him for a moment with the calm evaluation of someone whose entire job was reading people across species and cultural lines and deciding whether they were telling the truth. 15 minutes, she said. Then the briefing room. She left with the disc. The other 2 observers followed. Mikhail was already moving toward Cargo Bay 2. Venira followed him. "You do not have to assist," he said. "I am aware," she said. The cargo bay was at the back of the ship, low-ceilinged and smelling of metal and the cold that had leaked in from the hull fracture. The atmosphere's seal failure was a cracked gasket on the secondary ventilation port, exactly as boring as a 14-hour alert had suggested it would be. Kyle found the gasket, found the replacement in the emergency kit mounted beside the bay door. Replaced it in 11 minutes, which was 4 minutes faster than he'd estimated, possibly because he had an audience and refused to find that motivating. The alert stopped pinging. The silence it left behind was very clean. Venira sat on a cargo crate and watched him work. Her ribs had settled into a lower register of complaint with the help of the pain capsule. Her head was clearer than it had been in 3 days. The disc was gone from behind her ear, and her neck felt wrong without it, lighter than it should. "What happens now?" she said. "For you." Kyle closed the emergency kit and hung it back on the wall. "Survey Corp will want a full report. Might lose my survey certification for a while since I use the ship in a, let's say, non-survey capacity. Probably some paperwork. And the council directive," she said. "Now that it is verified, now that it is public." "That's above my pay grade," he said. "That's governments and diplomats and people with very long job titles. You are not interested in being part of what comes next." "I'm interested in fixing ships and finding things," he said. "Well, the rest of it will happen whether I'm interested or not." She looked at him. He was cleaning the tools he'd used, methodical, unhurried, the same way he'd done everything else since she'd woken up on his ship with her hands around his throat. "Kyle?" she said. "Yeah." I owe you a debt, she said. By Venari reckoning. A substantial one. You don't, he said. I do, she said. My tradition is clear. You preserved my life. You preserved the mission. You asked nothing in return and made no claim and did not use the moment to your advantage. In Venari accounting, this is a serious debt. He looked at her. How does that usually get settled? Service, she said. Skills, resources, loyalty, if the debt is large enough. I'm not interested in any of that, he said. I know you're not, she said. That is what makes it complicated. He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the broken gasket from the floor where he'd left it and turned it over in his hands. You said you're a fugitive, he said. Even if the council collapses politically, they don't collapse overnight. You're going to have a rough few years. Yes, she said. Where will you go? She had not thought about it. She had thought about the disk. She had thought about the observer station. She had not, in 3 days of running, thought about the day after the running stopped. I do not know, she said. Kyle put the gasket down. He sat on the cargo crate across from her, elbows on his knees, the way humans sat when they were thinking about something they hadn't decided yet. Survey Corp is looking for a xenolinguistics specialist, he said. The position's been open for 2 years because nobody qualified wants to spend 18 months at a time on a survey vessel eating rehydrated protein and looking at rocks. Venira looked at him. You are a third commander, he said, which means you speak, at minimum, 4 Venari dialects and at least 3 neutral space lingua francas, and probably a few things the translator chip can't even handle yet. And you're good under pressure. He paused. And you know how to hold very still when someone is putting a needle in your ribs. That is not typically listed as a job qualification, she said. It should be, he said. She looked at the cargo bay around them, the patched hull, the fixed gasket, the clean, unpretentious utility of a ship that was built to go places and find things and come back with what it found. The Survey Corps, she said carefully, is a human organization. Technically civilian, he said. They work with the Observer Corps, and after today, they're going to need someone who can talk to Venari governments without it becoming an incident. You are offering me a job, she said. I'm telling you a job exists, he said. What you do with that information is your call. She was quiet for a long moment. If I accept, she said, it would not constitute settlement of the debt. I told you there's no debt, he said. And I told you that is complicated, she said. So we will disagree on that point and continue. He almost smiled again. Still quick, still crooked, still gone before it finished. Yeah, he said. Okay. Outside the cardinal point, Neutral Post 7 went about its verification work, and the signal from the broadcast was still moving through neutral space, hitting relay stations and ship receivers and communications arrays on planets that hadn't asked for it, carrying its evidence outward in every direction at once, the way a light does when you take away the thing that was blocking it. Venira sat on a cargo crate on a human survey vessel with cracked ribs and a bare ear and an uncertain future, and thought about a conversation she would have later in a briefing room with a coordinator who had 4 eyes, where she would speak on the record for the first time about everything she had found and carried and protected and finally released. She thought about what came after that. She thought about rocks. Kyle Brennan stood up, tucked the tools away, and said, Briefing room in 4 minutes. Umvela Sin does not seem like someone who gives extensions. No, Venira agreed. She does not. She stood. Her ribs registered the movement with professional displeasure. They walked out of the cargo bay, down the corridor past the sealed hull membrane, through the bridge where the amber lights had finally shifted to yellow, which was not green, but was at least moving in the right direction, and out through the docking collar into the station. Behind them, the Cardinal Point sat in its berth, one engine at 60%, hull patched, atmosphere leak fixed, cargo bay quiet, all alerts resolved except the 3 that required parts Kyle didn't have and would need to requisition. It was, under any reasonable assessment, a mess. It was also, without question, still flying. That, Kyle had always thought, it was the only metric that mattered. He walked into the briefing room. Ven Ira walked in beside him. Vela Sin was already there, the disc on the table in front of her, her 4 eyes moving between the 2 of them with the precise attention of someone who had been alive long enough to know that the most important moments rarely looked the way you expected them to. "Let us begin," she said. They sat down, and they began.